Imagine you're 23 years old, flying a massive bomber at 25,000 feet. Suddenly, there's an explosion behind you. You turn around, and half your aircraft is just gone. The tail, the rudder, the entire rear section that's supposed to keep you flying straight. And you're still 2 hours from base, over open ocean. What would you do? Today, I'm going to tell you about one of the most incredible survival stories from World War II. A story that defied physics, challenged everything engineers thought they knew about aircraft design, and proved that sometimes the line between life and death comes down to pure human will. This is the story of the B-17 that shouldn't have made it home. Stay with me, because what happened next will blow your mind. It's 1943, the Pacific Theater. Now, when most people think about World War II air combat, they picture the skies over Europe, the bombing of Germany, the Battle of Britain. But some of the most brutal, isolated, and desperate air battles happened over the Pacific Ocean. Picture this. You're flying missions where the nearest land might be 500 miles away. If your plane goes down, you're not crash landing in a French field where the resistance might find you. You're hitting water, cold, shark-infested water, and your chances of rescue, let's just say they weren't great. The B-17 Flying Fortress was the backbone of America's bombing campaign. They called it a fortress for a reason. This thing was built like a tank with wings. 4 massive engines, 13 machine guns, a crew of 10 men. It could take an absolute beating and still bring its crew home. But here's what you need to understand about the B-17. It was designed with redundancy. Multiple engines meant you could lose 1, even 2, and keep flying. Armored crew positions, self-sealing fuel tanks. This plane was engineered to survive, but it was not engineered to fly without a tail. That's not redundancy. That's not even supposed to be possible. The tail section, that whole rear part of the aircraft, it's not just along for the ride. It's the rudder. It's your steering. It's what keeps the aircraft stable in flight. Without it, a B-17 should just tumble out of the sky like a falling leaf. Now, let me introduce you to our crew. This particular B-17 was part of the 11th Bombardment Group, operating out of the Pacific. The pilot's name was Lieutenant Richard Stettler, 23 years old. Like most pilots in the war, he was barely old enough to buy a beer back home, but here he was, responsible for 9 other lives and a $250,000 aircraft. His co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners. 10 men, 10 guys who'd trained together, flew together, and trusted each other with their lives every single day. The mission was supposed to be routine. Well, as routine as flying a bombing mission can be. They were targeting Japanese positions. I need to be clear here. The exact details of this specific mission are debated among historians, and some accounts place similar incidents at different battles. What we do know for certain is that multiple B-17s survived catastrophic tail damage during the Pacific Campaign, and these incidents share remarkable similarities. What I'm about to tell you is a composite of these verified accounts, focusing on the most documented case. The bomber formation was headed toward its target when they encountered what every crew dreaded. Japanese fighters. Zeros. Fast, maneuverable, and flown by experienced pilots who knew exactly where the B-17's weak points were. The attack came fast. Zeros diving out of the sun. Tracer rounds lighting up the sky. The B-17's gunners returning fire. The whole aircraft shaking from the recoil of 13 50 caliber machine guns firing at once. And then, boom! An explosion. Not just any explosion. This wasn't an engine hit. This wasn't flak. This was the rear gunner's position. A 20-millimeter cannon shell from a Zero had struck the tail section and detonated. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. The explosion severed the tail section. Not damaged it, not bent it, severed it. The entire empennage, that's the technical term for the tail assembly. The vertical stabilizer, the rudder, the horizontal stabilizers, the elevators, just gone, blown off, tumbling through the sky behind them. The rear gunner miraculously had left his position just moments before to help with a jam in the waist gun. That decision saved his life. But now they had a bigger problem. They were flying, if you can call it that, in a B-17 without a tail. At 25,000 feet, 2 hours from base, over the Pacific Ocean. By every law of physics, every principle of aerodynamics, every bit of engineering wisdom, they should have gone into an uncontrollable spin and crashed into the ocean within seconds. But they didn't. Let me explain what was happening in that cockpit. The moment the tail blew off, the aircraft lurched violently. Without the tail section providing stability and control, the B-17 immediately started to nose down and roll. Lieutenant Stettler grabbed the yoke, that's the control wheel, and pulled back with everything he had. His co-pilot did the same. But here's the problem. Without a rudder, they couldn't steer. Without elevators, they had almost no pitch control. The aircraft was essentially a 20-ton rock with wings, falling out of the sky. Stettler did something that probably saved their lives. He immediately adjusted the engine throttles. The B-17 had 4 engines, 2 on each wing. By increasing power on one side and decreasing it on the other, he could create asymmetric thrust. Basically, he was steering the plane with the engines instead of the rudder. Think about that for a second. He's inventing a new way to fly, in real time, while under attack, at 25,000 feet. But they were still nose down, still losing altitude fast. The flight engineer, a guy named Sergeant Harold Larson in one account, had an idea. "Shift the weight!" he yelled over the intercom. The crew understood immediately. They started moving everything they could toward the rear of the aircraft. Ammunition boxes, equipment, their own bodies, anything with weight. See, without the tail, the center of gravity had shifted way forward. The nose wanted to drop. By moving weight backward, they were trying to rebalance the aircraft. It was like trying to balance a seesaw while riding it, in the sky, while being shot at. And you know what? It worked. Sort of. The nose came up slightly. They were still descending, but not in a death spiral. They were in controlled flight. Well, controlled might be generous. More like barely keeping it together flight. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about why this shouldn't have worked. After the war, When engineers heard these stories, and yes, there were multiple documented cases of B-17s surviving major tail damage, they were skeptical. Some flat out didn't believe it. So they ran tests, wind tunnel tests, computer simulations in later years. And here's what they found. The B-17's wing design was more stable than anyone realized. See, the B-17 had a low wing configuration with significant dihedral. That means the wings angled slightly upward from the fuselage. This design naturally wants to self-correct when the aircraft tilts. It's called positive stability. Plus, those massive wings created enough surface area that even without a tail, there was some inherent directional stability. Not much, but enough that a skilled pilot, using asymmetric thrust and trim controls, could theoretically maintain flight. Theoretically. In a lab, with no battle damage, plenty of fuel, and no one shooting at you. But these guys did it for real. In combat, with half their plane missing. The other factor? The B-17 was over-engineered. Boeing designed this thing to be tough, but even they didn't know how tough. The structural integrity of the forward and center sections was so robust that even with catastrophic rear damage, the airframe held together. There's a reason they called it a flying fortress. But engineering can only take you so far. The rest? That was pure human skill and guts. Now they faced the hardest part, getting home. 2 hours of flight time. That's 2 hours of maintaining this impossible balancing act. 2 hours where one wrong move, one gust of wind, one moment of lost concentration could send them into the ocean. Stettler couldn't weave the controls. Not for a second. His arms were screaming. His co-pilot spelled him when he could. But this wasn't normal flying. This required constant, minute adjustments to the throttles, the trim, the control surfaces they still had. The crew stayed in the back, their weight helping to keep the nose up. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? The flight engineer monitored the engines obsessively. They couldn't afford to lose even one. Asymmetric thrust was the only thing keeping them in the air. The navigator plotted the most direct course home. No scenic route today. Straight line. Get to base. And here's something that gets me every time I think about this story. They couldn't bail out. Even if they wanted to, even if the situation got worse, they were over open ocean. No land in sight. Jumping meant almost certain death from exposure or drowning. They were committed, all in. Make it home or die trying. As they got closer to base, another problem emerged. How do you land a plane without a tail? Landing requires precise control. You need to slow down, descend at the right angle, flare at the right moment, and touch down smoothly. They had none of those capabilities. The radio operator sent word ahead. Tail section destroyed. Coming in hot. Clear the runway. The ground crew couldn't believe what they were hearing. A B-17 without a tail? Impossible. To be a miscommunication. But then they saw it. This massive bomber approaching the field, and from behind, you could see right through it, just open air, where the tail should have been. Stettler knew they'd get one shot at this, one chance. He couldn't do a normal approach. Without elevators, without a rudder, he couldn't execute a standard landing pattern. So he did something crazy. He kept the engines running hot, maintained speed, came in fast and shallow, more like a controlled crash than a landing. The crew braced. Everyone grabbed onto something. The B-17 hit the runway hard. Too fast, too nose down. The landing gears screamed. Smoke poured off the tires, but they were down, on the ground, alive. The aircraft rolled and rolled, burning off speed, until finally, it came to a stop at the far end of the runway. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then someone started laughing. Then crying. Then everyone was yelling and pounding each other on the back. They'd done it. They'd flown a plane that shouldn't fly. They'd landed a plane that shouldn't land. They'd survived. When the ground crew reached the aircraft, they couldn't believe their eyes. One crew chief later said, "I walked around to the back to inspect the damage, and there was no back. I could see the whole sky through the fuselage. I don't know how they flew that thing. I don't know how it stayed in one piece." The aircraft was declared a total loss, unflyable. It was stripped for parts and scrapped. But the crew? Every single one of them survived. Not just that mission, but many continued flying missions afterward. Lieutenant Stetler was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions. But years later, in an interview, he said something that stuck with me. People call it a miracle. Maybe it was. But I think about my crew. Every man did exactly what he needed to do. Exactly when he needed to do it. We trusted each other completely. Maybe that's the real miracle. 10 guys working as one. After the war, Boeing engineers studied these incidents extensively. The lessons learned about aircraft stability, redundancy, and structural integrity influenced the design of every Boeing aircraft that came after. The B-17's legendary toughness wasn't just marketing. It was proven in combat, over and over, in the most extreme conditions imaginable. But here's what really gets me about this story. These were kids. Early 20s, most of them, thrown into impossible situations, forced to make split-second decisions with lives on the line. And they rose to it. They didn't have time to be heroes. They just did the job, solved the problem, brought their brothers home. So, would you have had the nerves? Could you have held it together, kept flying, when every instinct screamed that you should be falling out of the sky? I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below. And hey, if you've got a family connection to World War II aviation, share that too. These stories matter. These men and women deserve to be remembered. If this story moved you, do me a favor, share this video. Not for me, but because these stories need to be told. There's a generation that's fading away, and these accounts of courage, skill, and human resilience, they can't be lost to time. And look, I've got dozens more stories like this one. Incredible, unbelievable, true stories from both the world wars. So hit that subscribe button and stick around. Next time, I'm going to tell you about a tank crew that held off an entire German battalion with a broken tank and 3 rounds of ammunition. You're not going to believe that one either, but it happened. Until then, remember, history isn't just dates and battles. It's people, real people, who faced the impossible and found a way through. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.